Hi, welcome to your walkthrough of how to make tomato sauce from scratch. So the first part of our prep, we're going to begin by cutting up the vegetables that we're going to use immediately, which are 2 carrots, 1 big stalk or 2 small stalks of celery. We're only going to use half of the green pepper in this process, but you're going to want to dice up the whole thing because later on we'll use the other half. Same thing with the onion, and 6 cloves of garlic, and 5 whole tomatoes, or 2 to 3 cans of chopped tomatoes if you're buying it at the store. So now that our prep work is done, we have our carrots and celery here, tomatoes, onions, green peppers, and our garlic. Now we're going to go to the pan and we're going to get it started. Put that on medium-high heat. One, two. We use 2 to start with, and then once this process is done before starting the other one, we'll use another 2. So let's let that get hot and then we'll come back. So now that you have your pan heated up, you're going to take your chopped carrots and celery and you're going to add it to the oil. You don't want it so hot that it sounds like you're sizzling Chinese food. We're not doing a stir fry. We're just cooking off the vegetables and releasing the sugar from inside the veggies. So you want them to be nice and soft. The reason you do the carrots and celery first is because you need them fully cooked so that we can do what we need to do once all the veggies are done. So while that is cooking, what I like to do is get my vegetable broth ready. So you can either use a boxed vegetable broth, or you could buy the jar that you add to the water, or you could buy the cubes. It's up to you. For this demonstration, I chose to use the boxed one, but I normally do use the jar. Okay, so that's going pretty nicely. You want to be sure to stir this relatively often because you don't want them to turn brown. We're not trying to caramelize the carrots or the celery. We just want them cooked. After a few minutes, when it seems like they're getting a little bit softer, then you want to add half of your onions, your green peppers, and your garlic. Okay, half the onions. Half the green peppers. And half of the garlic. Now you want to be sure that you do not let the garlic burn. So you're gonna, for this part, you're gonna be stirring frequently. Once you get that all mixed up, so to prevent them from browning or burning, what you do is you gather them kind of in a pile. And what this will do is make them sweat, which releases all the water in the veggies and starts the process of releasing the sugar. While this process is happening, I like to add my salt and pepper. I start off on this part with half of a tablespoon. That may sound like a lot, but you're actually making a lot of sauce. So if you choose to make a smaller batch, just lower the amount of sauce. The amount of salt for your sauce. And also the same thing with the pepper. I like a lot of pepper, however the people that I cook for do not. So I usually only use half of a tablespoon for the whole sauce. However, when it's just for me, I'll use a whole tablespoon or more, depending on how much sauce I'm making. So once you get that in there, you mix it up again. And now you're going to start smelling all of the flavors, and it's going to start smelling really, really good. You should be able to smell the onions and the garlic cooking with the carrots and the celery. You may even think you're smelling a soup, because this is the exact base for soup. Okay, we're just going to put the lid on that, and we'll check on that in about 2 minutes when it should be ready to go in the blender. Okay, so it's been about 2 minutes, and it looks like the vegetables are about ready to go in the blender. So I'm just going to stir this. And after 2 minutes, if you notice, maybe you chopped your veggies a little big and they're just not ready to go in the blender yet. They're not tender. When you push down on them, they don't mush. I mean, they don't have to be mushy, but you should be able to cut through them with no problem, whether you're using plastic or wood or whatever. So at this point, I take 2 cups of our vegetable broth. And I let that simmer with the vegetable broth for about another 2 to 3 minutes. And then we'll throw that in the blender. So I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, so now that we let it simmer for 2 to 3 minutes till it was just boiling, and now we put it into the blender. Okay, so you blend it until it's liquefied and you can't see any more chunks. Whoa. I think we're good. Okay, so we're back. I'm going to turn it on to medium heat, not medium high. That's very important. And we're going to use the other 2 tablespoons of oil. And if you're making a smaller batch, remember, do not use so much oil. Okay, so once that gets heated up, then we're going to throw in the rest of the onions and green peppers. Then we'll throw in the garlic and the tomatoes. So let's get this heated up, and then we'll continue. So now that we've heated up our pan, we're going to go ahead and add in the rest of the onions and green peppers. Hopefully you won't be holding a camera, so you'll be able to scrape out whatever's left in the bottom. Okay. So we're going to let this cook for 2 to 3 minutes. You see how white the onions are right now? When you'll know it's time to put the garlic in when those onions are no longer white, but mostly clear. And you'll be able to see that in just a moment here. Okay, so I'm not sure how much you can see in the video of the onions and the color change, but the onions are now mostly clear. They're not that bright white that they were. Depending on the onions that you're using, if you're using white onions, they'll turn clear and you'll be able to see through them. If you're using yellow onions, they'll be kind of clear but have a very yellow and beige tint. And if you're using red onions, I don't know what to tell you because I don't use red onions in my sauce. But I'm sure you'll be able to tell it should have the same clear texture. Let's see if we can zoom in. There you go. That's a little better. So you can see the onions are more of a clear color than a white, especially in that one right there that I'm focused on. So that's how you know that it's time to add in all the rest of your garlic. So just go ahead and stir, and it only takes about 30 seconds to a minute if you have it on medium heat for your garlic to become fragrant, and you're going to leave it just a few seconds longer than it becoming fragrant before you add in the tomatoes. You don't want it to burn, but you do want that delicious garlicky flavor to release into all the veggies and the tomatoes. Okay, so we're right at that tipping point right before the garlic starts turning brown and golden, and we don't quite want it to get there yet because we still have some cooking to do. So we're going to toss in all 5 of our chopped tomatoes. So you're going to get that mixed in real well. the tomatoes let off some water as you cook them, which is the purpose of cooking them now versus adding them to what we just blended. You don't want it to be too watery. You would like a nice thick sauce. So we're going to give that about 5 minutes to cook down a little bit, and we'll be back. We're going to put the lid on so that the steam can help soften and cook the tomatoes and release all the water. Before we put the lid on, you're going to want to add some salt. Remember, salt is your flavor. So I'm going to add about a tablespoon of salt. The whole reason for adding so much salt is because the tomatoes can take on a very bitter flavor and be extremely bland. And that's not what you want in a sauce. You want a robust and flavorful sauce. So we add the salt, not only to help release the water in the tomatoes, but to give it some flavor. And let that cook down for just a few minutes. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes, and we're going to come in and give this a stir. And you'll notice that our tomatoes are pretty much liquid. They've become very much saucy. So we're going to let that continue simmering, but now it's time to add in all those delicious veggies that you blended. So let's get that done, and I'll come back once I have that added in. Okay, now that you've got a good rolling boil, now it's time to add your seasonings. Please make sure that you're stirring this throughout the process so that stuff doesn't stick to the bottom, because it will stick to the bottom. And you don't want to turn your heat down yet. You want to let it continue simmering even with the seasonings. So what I use is 1.5 teaspoons of Italian seasoning. This is a mix of rosemary and marjoram and oregano and basil and other Italian seasonings and parsley. So I only use 1.5 teaspoons of that. But I use 1.5 tablespoons of oregano and basil. Okay, so now that those are all added, you'll find that it starts accelerating its boil. And just work it all in. Makes it nice and flavorful. You're going to smell a lot of flavors. And if you taste it right now, you're going to be thinking, this is extremely strong. Don't worry. There's still something that we need to add. So we've added all of our fresh ingredients. And as much as I like to make it from scratch all the time without using any canned products at all, if you're in a rush, it's really just not feasible. So you could use crushed tomatoes, right? And you'd add that in right about now after letting this simmer for a few minutes. And then normally you're going to want to add some tomato paste. However, I like thin spaghetti or angel hair, so I don't actually always use a thick sauce. So for the purpose of thin spaghetti or angel hair, I use a thinner sauce, so I'm not going to use the tomato paste. However, you would buy one of the smallest cans of tomato paste and just add it in, and it'll thicken your sauce and give it that delicious ragu texture. Okay, so now I've added in the crushed tomatoes and I've stirred it in, and this is what you have. It now looks like tomato sauce. But you're not done. You're going to let this simmer about 30 minutes or so, maybe an hour, depending on how thick you want it. The longer you simmer it, the thicker it's going to get. Make sure you are stirring and stirring and stirring. You can leave and come back, but make sure you stir. Because if not, everything's going to get stuck to the bottom. It's going to burn, and you're going to have a smoky flavored sauce, and not the good kind. Trust me on this. So now you're going to turn down the heat from the medium heat to low and just let that simmer. If you're really in a rush, don't turn down your heat. Just continue stirring. So what's really good about the sauce is you can make it in advance. You can make a huge pot like this, and you could put it, once it cools, you can put it in bags to freeze or in jars to freeze. It's great to make in advance. It'll last for 2 weeks in your fridge, sometimes 3, depending on how cold your refrigerator is. Make sure that you are smelling it and tasting it, because it has carrots and celery, it will get a sour flavor. So you don't want to be serving that. You may not be able to tell right away that it's bad, but it'll taste sour or metallic, and you don't want that. You don't want to eat that. You don't want to be serving your kids that, your husband that, or anybody else in your life that. Okay, so we're just going to let this simmer.